So we're going to move on to our next panel, which will be panel number 4, Managing EVSE Network Payments. So what we're going to learn from this is how ISO 15118 can help fix payment issues and what we can learn from the credit card industry. So I'd like to welcome our panel 4 up, please. Our moderator is Fietzek, the Chief Technology Officer of InCharge Energy, and he will introduce the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Hello. I actually think we have an exciting panel now because everyone we have seen today, I have met before, I have talked a lot to, and on a regular basis through the last 10, 20 years. The panel we are having now is actually crossing over to credit cards. So all the complaints we have, why do credit cards work, why don't they work, what do we have to do, and how does that all fit together with ISO 15118? That's what we're going to discuss on the panel. So that's why I'm quite excited. To me, who don't know me, Fietzek, I started my career a long time ago with BMW. We launched the i3, i8, the plug-in hybrids, then moved more on to the infrastructure side and joined Electrify America, where we actually started building out the first public charging, or first nationwide, whatever, public charging network in the US. And that was also where credit card readers started coming into the big picture on a larger scale. So that's what we want to discuss today. So I have a great panel here with Carly, providing credit card readers. She's the CEO of NIAX North America. Most everyone here probably has used the NIAX charger or NIAX reader so far. Then we have Steve from Visa. So everyone has a Visa credit card, or I guess everyone. So Steve is going to explain to us how that all fits together. So this is kind of the outside of the industry part. And then Matthieu from Flow, running a charging network in Canada. And then we have Dirk convening the 15118. So he's kind of the one bringing all of the comments which we have had today together and enabling plug and charge with the standards. So out of that, maybe I start with Carly. Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know a bit about you and the company?
Sure. Nice to see everyone. For those that I've had the pleasure of meeting before, and for those that I have not, it's nice to meet you and hope we can connect. My name is Carly Furman. I'm CEO of NIAX North America. As Cliff mentioned, NIAX provides credit card solutions. So we are a global payment solution provider, providing credit card systems for the unattended industries, including EV charging, right? So it's A to Z plug-and-play credit card platform, right? So you have the proprietary EMV, L1, L2, L3 credit card readers. We also do APMs and also closed loop and open loop mobile payments, as well as then all the PCI DSS L1 security behind it. So we provide the payment ecosystem and the infrastructure, and then also the relationships and all the certifications with processing partners around the globe. NIAX devices are in about 60 countries, partnering with over 100 processing partners, and also then creating that full loop payment ecosystem and all the data dissemination as well as integration protocols with charging providers, whether it's doing what we call our Marshall protocol, or also server to server payment integrations.
Thanks, Carly. Oh, go ahead.
Take that cue. Hi, everyone. Steve Carrillo, based out of Austin, Texas, and I think a lot of you are probably asking yourself, what is Visa doing here? And it's funny, right? You look at the evolution of electric vehicles and where things are going, and if you look at Visa, everything is becoming a way to pay. And so as we look at connected cars, as we look at integrating just different types of services together, we see electric vehicles as being a huge driver of innovation. So last thing I will say is I run Visa's strategy around electric vehicle charging and connected devices, and that's it.
Matthieu?
Yeah, and I'm Matt, so from Flow. For those of you who don't know Flow, we're a manufacturer of EVSE and operator of charging networks, so CPO, EMSP. My role is in the product team working on the different standards. I like to call myself the guardian of our interoperability, so make sure that our team respects the protocol to the letter and get into compliance and don't deviate from anything.
And Dirk?
Yeah, so I'm Dirk Großmann. I'm with Vector. I'm since 2018 the convener of ISO 15118. Vector itself is providing products for, on one hand side, the cars. So we have a ISO 15118 implementation, also -2, -20 for vehicles, as well as for charging stations and the charging controller, also running already -20 BPT. And testing equipment to test and validate your products, whether it be the EV or the EVSE.
Thank you for that. And really bring it back to how we started today in the morning. So what's the customer experience and all of that? When we started with Electrify America and we partnered with NIAX and the charger manufacturers at this time, it was really how to enable easy access to charging. You don't need to download an app, you don't need to have certificates, whatever it is. You just use your credit card, and everyone is known. Carly, we probably, maybe Dirk, I know you as long as Carly, but we started the journey a long time ago together. So what is your experience? What has worked well? What has changed? How have you seen the evolution of credit card readers in the charging business?
Yeah, I think, when I don't know, how long has it been, 5, 6 years when we started this journey together. It's interesting. I think the credit card systems were kind of thought of as an afterthought with the chargers. So they were just kind of, seen as maybe from the CPOs as they're bolted on, and it's just kind of another, supplier component, that an EVSE integrates with. There's so much more behind the payment experience. I think, as you mentioned initially, the idea of being able to offer card-present payments was seen as a way that people did not have to have multiple different payment apps, right? And I think this is going to become even more important and relevant, actually. We're all technology people, right? We live and breathe our technology, so I think sometimes it's becomes difficult to remember what it's like if you're not living and breathing in a certain industry, right? So, where EV drivers right now are still primarily, right, your early adopters, those that are more tech savvy. When we're starting to think about going beyond early adopters, we all probably have a case study in our mind, right? A parent, a friend or family who's like not so tech savvy. These people are the ones who are going to be holding out with feeling comfortable driving a EV car, even more so if they don't have a payment experience that's synonymous with fueling, right? So, on top of it, you're throwing, in this whole new technology with the actual vehicles, then layer on top of that, hey, how am I going to do a long distance trip and feel comfortable fueling with, plug and charge, or I'm going to have all these apps, and, what happens if I, get there and, I don't have, good cell service, or the card rejects, and, I don't even have, attendant to be able to go in and see. Those are the kind of barriers that I think we're going to be seeing more and more of as we're going beyond early adopters, which also makes it so important that we really start focusing even more so on, kind of what I call the handshake between the payment device and the EV charger, right? There is so much complexity with the SDKs and, kind of that relationship between the CPOs, the payment processing providers like NIAX and the EVSEs, right? So I think it's, kind of the time, that we don't think of it as an afterthought and actually think of that payment experience and thinking about how the driver actually wants to pay. Maybe not everyone wants to play with plug and charge for different reasons. Their own comfort, having multiple different payment methods, work versus a loyalty card. So, being able to offer any and all ways that someone actually wants to pay is going to be important with accelerating the adoption of EV chargers or EV cars.
And Carly, you know that this question is coming because I think some of you even are going to ask it if I don't ask it. In the last years, we had a lot of complaints about pre-auth amounts. So, and we're going to touch on that also with Steve. How is credit card payment for charging different than for other services? And do you have anything how we can improve the pre-auth amount situation so that we don't have to pre-auth the full amount of a charging session before we go into the charging session?
Yes, we do now, Cliff. So when we first started, and again, without going into too much detail, because you can touch on that, Steve, if we want or we don't want. But based on the MCC, so how a transaction is actually coded has to do with a lot of the payment rules by the card brands and the processing partners and the issuing banks as well. So when we first started this journey with EV charging, there wasn't even really a separate code. I think we were using we were coding it as parking or something like that, right? Because there actually wasn't even an EV payment code. So the way that we actually could process the transaction once it hit our payment ecosystem was slightly different. And part of the work that I have done with Visa and also Visa advocating for the industry and working together and hearing the feedback from our CPO partners and drivers is now to be able to do a much lower pre-auth amount. So it can actually be, it doesn't have to be that $50 and being able then to settle for less, which is how we had to do it to make it a legal chip card transaction. And now we can do something that is more synonymous with a fueling transaction where we can actually do a very low pre-auth amount, so $1, $10, whatever actually the CPO, how much risk you want to take on, and then incrementally settle for more after the final amount has been set when the charge is completed. So that's going to give a payment experience that is a lot more synonymous with fueling. B, is going to be easier now to start expanding beyond early adopters, especially if we're looking, at people who might have to make multiple different charges throughout the day for different reasons, or don't have $50, on their cards to have a pre-auth for, as well as is going to kind of take out that barrier that we saw a lot initially, which is, those, you're stealing my $50, and it's, and having to just explain that it's a pending transaction, it will drop, that kind of thing.
That also helps and supports, and we have some of our commercial vehicle manufacturers here, when battery sizes go bigger and you have higher charging rates, all of that. We have one customer here who has pre-auth amounts of $250. Some credit cards don't allow that. So therefore, that's amazing, and I'm pretty sure that most of the CPOs are going to happily take the risk on a payment falling through in order to have a better customer experience. So Steve, I would like to come over to you. Visa is running millions, I guess, or even billions of credit card sessions a day. So how much different is charging for or billing for charging than billing for anything else?
Yeah, I think I'll tell you a couple things you already know. Electric vehicle charging itself is very unique. So you're combining fueling with parking. It's not attended, as Carly mentioned. There's no one there to help you. You don't know how long you're going to be there. I mean, in certain cases you can guess. And a lot of times, unless you're doing a known amount in the beginning for a certain kilowatt cost, you don't even know how much the transactions are going to cost. All that creates a situation where if you are a charge point or operating a model where you're trying to get payment from a consumer or a driver, what do you do? And so at Visa, and I can't speak for the other networks, but the goal here is to make everything seamless and easy for people to pay. That is the goal. And so we have a number of models. Carly touched on one, and happy to go through those details if that's interest to the group here, and you can catch me offline about it too. But there are a number of ways where we try to provide flexibility to help manage risk if you are providing electricity, or to help provide just unique ways for your consumers to pay. And kind of going further, as you look right now, it's no secret, again, most of the payments right now are card not present in app, a lot of app-based payments. But I like to think about my family members as they're charging. It's difficult sometimes to explain to people, okay, get on all these apps. And so the need for having physical devices there is also key. So it's going to be, I think from a Visa perspective, it's going to be interesting to see where the numbers fade out. Is there going to be more app-based? Is there going to be more physical devices? We don't know yet. But in the end, there's going to be a need for all of it. So.
And Steve, follow-up question to that one. We have heard a lot about collaboration amongst CPOs, MSPs, car companies, charger companies. How is that in the credit card industry? Because I remember that we had issues that some credit cards work different than others, and then you also have the bank in between, which has additional rules on it. So how is that usually aligned so that for the customer it's the same experience at the end?
Yeah, and again, it's a challenge, and it depends what parts of the world we're talking about. But at the end of the day, we try to answer to what the needs of the market are. So as an example, fleet is going to be a huge play in electric vehicles. So recently in April, and we have some more changes coming in October, we've added data fields into our authorization messages to support time of charge, kilowatts, and other other details that are pertinent to the transaction. And so we look at ways to help enhance data if we can, and that's all based on feedback, right? So we're managing, as you're talking about, multiple parts of the ecosystem. So you have, again, you have the consumer who, we just want an easy way to pay. That's what they'll tell you. And then you have the charging operators. I'm sure you're seeing the complaints too. How do you make and create a sticky service for your clientele? That absolutely is the case. And then you have a lot of the banks. So think about the card in your wallet. A lot of banks right now have sustainability on their agenda. And so they're offering card programs targeted specifically to that. So they might give you rewards for doing an electric vehicle charging transaction. And so the answer really is we try to manage all those stakeholders, and depending where we are and who's speaking loudly, we try to make it fair. So it's the best way to put it.
Okay, thank you. Now, Matt, coming over to you, building charging station, running a charging network in Canada, I guess also in the US partially. So what is your experience? How are you integrating credit card readers? What have you seen changing over the years?
Yeah, it was challenging projects to integrate credit card payments, and maybe two I would like to share with the community that I find interesting is first one is the integration. How do you integrate a payment terminal into a charging stations? We've seen two ways. The first one is you integrate the payment terminal with your chargers. So the firmware will communicate, of your station will communicate with the payment terminal immediately or like directly. And then as a CPO, like you need to get all the data back from standard protocol like OCPP to troubleshoot and make sure you operate the payment terminal properly. So that's one design decisions, but then there's another design decision where you can have the payment terminal server communicate directly with the CPO, and then the CPO will kind of remote start the charging station. So there's pros and cons in the two. It's not an easy decision to do, because as the guardian of interoperability within Flow, we had to deviate from the standards, and in terms of selling to other CPOs or integrating other systems, like you want to be very close to the specification of any standard, so you can scale and sell as many stations as possible. So that was kind of a complicated one. The second challenges we found is a stack of regulation, or maybe I should say like requirements, where we have one requirement to have the credit card payment, but then another requirement is to have price transparency for the EV drivers, especially when you settle the transaction. They need to have a detailed receipt about the time they've been charging, the kilowatt hour they've been charging. Sometimes you have an idle fee as well, because you want to incentivize them when they're fully charged to move their vehicle. So you charge another fee. And you want to have this detail to the EV drivers. But from our perspective, it's EMSP work. The EMSP has all the information about the EV drivers contract with the mobility providers. And the mobility providers can send an email with all the details. In the credit card transaction, where there's no technically EMSP per se, like it's the CPO work. So we had to find ways, especially on station where you don't have big screens, how do we communicate with the EV drivers? Like a credit card transaction, from our perspective, it's an anonymous transaction. So yeah, we had to be creative and work a lot with our design team to see, okay, what's the best way to first ensure privacy, but also provide the necessary information that regulations or different requirements. I forgot to mention the tax as well. Like there's a whole layer of taxes that sometimes you need to apply to the EV drivers.
Thank you. And now, Dirk, coming back to what we kind of had also the whole day, you coming from the 1511.8 side, talking about credit cards. So how do you see the relationship between plug and charge, credit cards, and where are we on that?
Yeah, so from a standardization point of view, I mean, we create a standard not to limit the industry in the end, yeah? We want to enable the industry to build products as they like and what they think are the best products for the market, and then the market shall decide. Therefore, right early on, within the ISO protocol, we have foreseen the two possibilities, what we call EIM and plug and charge. So EIM means external identification means. That means there's an external way to identify yourself and to authorize the charging process. This could either be via an RFID tag or whatsoever you have, or this could be a credit card. We don't care, it's some external method. Fine for us, so that's foreseen in the standard. And on the other hand side, we're offering the possibility for plug and charge. And then I think it's up to the market and to market participants to build the best products out of that. And then the market can decide in which area or for which use case, which solution fits best.
And while we are focusing, and that's more a question to all of us, really on North America right now, all of the companies here are global companies. You have credit card readers in Europe, certainly Visa is all over the world. You're operating in Canada and in the US. So what kind of lessons learned do you see with credit card payments from other countries, which we might apply for better customer experience in the US?
Well, from the Canadian perspective, what I've seen in the US, and I don't have any explanation or opinion on this, it's just, well, actually I have an opinion, but that it's, tap only is not the preferred way in the US. Like US still wants to have the insert and the swipe and any type of ways you can do the payment, which as an engineer and from a product perspective, I find it the less part, the better. So having just tap only, I personally find it easier to implement, and also from a reliability perspective, it's easier to maintain. You have less things to take care about, and also tap has there's nothing that can get into, like it's wireless. So when you have insert, like some dust or anything can get into, it gets also rusty, so the contacts are not that great. So from longevity and reliability uptime, I find that the tap only is it's a good perspective.
I think that's a good point. Let's stay on that for a little bit. Also, maybe Carly, how are the credit card readers across the globe? And do you see more tap or swipe or dip? And then Stephen, what do you see on the credit card side?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the region, right? So you go to, you look at the UK or Australia or even Canada, right? And you're going to have 90% plus, almost, in some regions, almost 100% tap. The US, what we still see, it's about, I'd say about half of the transactions going through NIAX are still EMV inserts, so someone inserting their card. And then, about 40% or so are contactless. So somebody either tapping a card or paying with, Apple Pay or a different kind of mobile payment. And then, 10% or less still have legacy swipe. And I think when we're looking, again, I think it's too early personally to only put contactless readers in the US. I know Visa, you probably feel the same, right? There just isn't enough cards out there yet, or they're still being deployed, right? There's a lot of logistics, right, with so many people with getting the card issuers to be able to get cards with contactless capabilities, as well as also, there's a lot with EMV, which is the chip card in it. So I think, where I do hear your point from, the integration perspective, again, I think it's important that we're thinking about how people want to pay and accepting every and any available method of payment, right? Plug and charge, paying with inserting a card, paying with mobile payment, paying with a closed loop app. And then, even to take it maybe a step farther too, is, now thinking what else we can do with the transaction, right? There's so much interaction capabilities with the transaction. It doesn't only have to be closed loop too, right? So the loyalty benefits, things that you can do to kind of start creating more engagement through the transaction, especially in an unattended location, right? Where historically there is not a lot of personalization with the payment experience. So, really starting to think beyond just the actual payment and incorporating loyalty, omni-channel payment experiences, cross-retail transactions. So there's just so much that we can start doing and looping in every type of way that people want to pay.
Now, Stephen, why don't we have 100% tap cards in the US?
I know, I need to do my job better, apparently. Yeah, so the numbers right now is 34% of all face-to-face payments are tapped right now. And so the US, by far, is a laggard across the world. You go to Europe, most countries there, again, around closer to 100%. So actively being worked on. It's an easy way to pay. No one can take that away. But to the overall question about lessons learned throughout the world, I think if I could really simplify it down to one word, it's communication. Managing the customer experience is so critical, and it's very easy to mess up. What I mean by that is, if you don't explain maybe how you're going to hold funds, or explain how your wallet works, or explain if you are going to do a large amount up front, you leave your customer very confused, and it's honestly bad just customer service. And so I always, if I just had to give one piece of advice, is make it clear to your drivers, to the person coming to your stations, and say, hey, this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm holding it for this amount. When you do that, you're going to reduce the amount of cardholder calls that are going to come in to the banks. They'll be more likely to work with you if you need something. It just makes the ecosystem happy. And again, communication sounds like such an easy thing to do, but we all have our troubles meeting it.
But I will say, right, to your point, that is one of the challenges of unattended payments. And nothing is really more unattended and more crucial than when you're looking at EV charging, right? It's not like, buying a water or a snack, right, which next, we do a lot of food and bev unattended too. Right? I mean, this is someone like getting stuck and not being able to leave a location, right? So I think, also we're looking at the communication. It's not only just the clear payment experience to the consumers, it's also having a stronger communication between ourselves, in this case, the CPO, the payment services provider, and also the EVSE. So I think, Matt, you had touched on it, right? Also starting to think maybe it doesn't need to be standardization, right? But also, options that work for the CPO or EVSE, right? Are we doing the handshake between the machine itself and the payment reader, right? And making sure that those SDKs are constantly being updated and that there is, a robust payment integration. And, if someone is saying that, it's not working, what is not working, right? Is it not working because, it doesn't have bank credentials? Is it not working because it's user error? Is it not working because, actually the integration with the NIX device and, whatever charger we might be talking about, right, hasn't been updated, and there's an SDK that really is not working as it, should be working, and the APIs aren't reliable, and then also looking at, that option of also doing server-to-server payment to charger integrations, right, putting a little bit more onus on the CPO and that relationship between the payment services provider and the CPO, right? There's pluses and minuses, to both.
And I think I would tie that also back to the diagnostic discussion which we had earlier. Because sometimes it's just not visible to the driver why it doesn't work. It says it doesn't work because we had issues in the past that card required a PIN, but you cannot type in the PIN. It should be visible to the customer and driver. So that, as you said, communication, but also integration on diagnostics. And now, Dirk, plug-in charge. You probably say everything is solved with plug-in charge?
Well, we wouldn't have these issues, with cards or swiping or pins or whatsoever. Nevertheless, I think obviously some of the issues remain the same. Yeah, if you have no internet connection, none of the system works. Yeah, maybe I don't know. Card readers are able to store the information and allow charging or authorize the charging and then do the billing afterwards. That might be a little benefit if the reader supports something like that. But that's a given then, that if you have a system like that, the internet connection for the charger is a prerequisite.
And Matt, one question also. We heard earlier today that with app payments and also with plug-in charge, you have timeouts. And I don't really remember who made that example, looking at the phone first before actually authorizing a charging session in the morning. Do we have these kind of timeout situations with credit cards as well? Or is that a different use case than the app?
Yes, but it's the typical timeout that we most see is people plug in and then they're trying to figure out how to pay. They're like looking for their RFID card or they're trying to find the right mobile app if they don't have like rooming with this specific CPO. And by the time they find it, like there's a timeout on the CCS communication and then they need to start again. What we've seen as well, specific to the credit card, is more of the pre-authorization that works. But then on our side, we may be too slow to settle the transaction, and then the pre-authorization expired. But we're talking more days than just a few seconds or minutes.
So I think I have to correct one thing. So within the ISO protocol, especially for authorization, because this could take an infinite amount of time, we are able to resend the message for as long as we want, so to say. Yeah? Because exactly out of that problem, we don't know how long it takes in the back end. So this is foreseen. If it's not handled properly, then sorry, it's not a fault of the protocol itself, it's a poor implementation because the protocol allows exactly for that. That it's kind of formerly we had this response pending, for example, in OBD systems. It's the same approach here, that the message can be...
Yes, yeah, no, I'm sorry, it's not specific to ISO. That's why, like, on our station, we're suggesting to plug in first rather than authenticate first for some of these reasons.
I think when you're talking about timing out, for instance, this is again coming to having a more solidified relationship between the payment integration partners and the EVSEs. That's something that can be configurable, right? So the actual length of time for a timeout can be configured, right? Of course, there's you don't want it too long, right? Because then you're going to start getting into issues of credit cards being open and charging someone coming in, right? But you're going to have a different kind of risk mitigation, in an EV charging environment, right? And the amount of time that you need to have, versus in a different unattended, like a self-checkout environment, right? Where you're going to want to have a much shorter timeout, but you're thinking about, the handshake again between the reader and the charger, right? You need something to kind of wake up, right, the charger and kind of initiate that integration. I think, we talked, Matt, before this session, right, about, kind of the pros and cons, and do you want to charge, plug in first and then, start, the charge, or is it vice versa? On one hand, I can see what you mean about the timing out issue. On the other, again, thinking about going beyond early adopters and making a more intuitive, synonymous charging experience with fueling, You could say, hey, someone presents their card and then starts, as long as you have a long enough timeout, right, and then can actually plug in. Additionally, that's a way too to let people have the option of how they want to pay, right? If you start the charge, right, then you automatically default maybe to plug and charge versus actually tapping your card or paying with your mobile payment, and then being able, to start the charge, so that there's a fallback, if you will.
And Steve, and we touched a bit on that, paying for a charging session. What is different paying for a charging station than for buying a Coke at the vending machine?
It's not too far off, right? Except it only takes you an undefined amount of time. So kind of goes back to the first question you asked. And there's certain elements of this that you can predict, and there's certain elements you can't. So when you are trying to define your authorization practices, you want to figure out, okay, what is the average amount a typical users come into your site? How long are they charging? So you can make these types of decisions. When you're talking about dispensing a Coke or anything from a vending machine, right? It's very one-dimensional. And I think as we start talking about plug and charge specifically, that experience, it needs to kind of operate the same way. And so right now, I think we could all say it's pretty clunky, and it's a matter of how do we make it smooth? And so lots of different ways to do it. I'm not here to tell you one way is better or another. I just think like the gentleman before in the previous panel just saying, let's put our heads together and try to figure out what's the best way to do this. And I think from a Visa perspective, if we haven't thought of something and you do, that's something we would look to take forward as well.
Thank you for this. So moving forward now, I think we still identified we are optimizing, we need to communicate to the customer how to use a credit card, but I think in general how to use a charger because it comes over and over and over again, but how to do it right. So Carly mentioned the interaction with the CPOs because they're at the end working, or the MSPs with the end customer. Is there anything what we can do jointly, or how can we reach those customers so that especially that first-time EV buyer, which maybe doesn't know that they're plug and charge in the car and just goes there with a credit card, how do we reach them to inform them how it's done? So whoever wants to go.
Let's start. But again, I think it's us being able to have open communication, right? So with the EV charging manufacturers, with the CPOs, there's plenty of places for signage here, right? I can speak for the NIAX readers. There's voice prompts on them in multiple languages, right? There's actual commands, right? So being able to now make sure that the flows make sense and the commands that we're presenting to customers are intuitive, and there's, the payment ecosystem, it's very layered. So there's a lot of things that can happen in different ways. You can kind of have a decision tree going, right? So make sure that's communicated. People understand there's plenty of ways that we can, in an unattended environment, still communicate with our consumers and have engaging experience that leaves them, not feeling, mystified about what's going on, including having a fallback, method, right? Which I think even if, we're talking about plug and charge, you still you can't have one method of payment in an unattended environment where, someone is, you're talking about mobility, right? So being able to, make sure that that's, there's kind of a seamless communication in the payment experience, regardless of how someone's paying, and also of a fallback method and that kind of order is something I think we all need to just kind of be working together and ensuring that we're working towards.
Steve and also Matt, Matt, your phone number is on the charger, so therefore someone is going to call your call center if it doesn't work, and the same for Matt. And I'm actually more interested right now on the credit card. I have a phone number on my credit card. If I call that number, does that attendant know anything about charging?
Yeah, probably not. So at the end of the day, so it depends the exact issue. So the network, so Visa, our rule is if you decide you want to deploy a contactless only solution, we do require a backup. So a backup can be that phone number you're talking about. It can be an app. And so, of course, that's to get you as a consumer in touch with the charge point that you're currently at, the charge point operator that you're currently trying to charge at. That being said, if you run into an issue, which I actually haven't heard of, which I am surprised, is issues where there is a double charge, so maybe you got 5 kilowatts, but you got charged 10. I haven't seen very many of those. So that's where the number on your back of your card comes handy, because your bank can help you with that. So if, for example, you did get double charged or fraud happens on your card, you always call a number on your back of your card.
I'm laughing, and I saw you looked at me and you're laughing. That's because they're not calling you. They're calling either the CPO or they're calling the payment facilitator. So a payment facilitator, if you're not aware, right? So who actually is holding the relationship with the processing partner, right? Whether it's, with the US, Chase or Global Payments or Elavon, whoever, the end processing partner is, right? Whoever has that relationship is the one who is responsible for also having their information on the end consumer's credit card, right? That phone number. It's called a dynamic descriptor. So part of being a payment solution provider, which is what NIAX is considered, right? It's not just giving a piece of hardware or giving integration specs. It's also having that relationship with the end processing partner and being what's called a payment facilitator, right? So that makes it easy for a CPO to automatically start taking payments, whether it's card present or also like taking, your app payments or alternative payment methods as well, like, Alipay or PayPal, things like that. You could also take with NIAX devices. So as the payment facilitator, your phone number is on there. So they either know that they went to, whatever, an InCharge or Electrify America or EVgo chargers, so they call them and say, you stole my money, or why is there such a high charge? Or they call the payment facilitator, whose phone number is on their credit card statement. So probably just don't hear it.
Yeah, I'll bring the
CPO
perspective, but I think we, as a CPO, we also have some responsibilities, and we have to assess different risk. To go back to your point about the internet connection, if there's no internet communication on the chargers, well, as a CPO, do you take the risk to locally authorize the sessions and then you reconciliate afterwards? Like we're collecting tons of data that makes us more and more confident that, we know a station may be down for either a few minutes or a few hours, and we'll just authorize the transaction with RFID cards, or this goes back to the decision architecture I had at the beginning of integrating directly with the firmware of the station. So the credit card has been pre-authorized, so the station can run the transaction without having any communication to the CPO. Well, those are trade-offs, but the risk you can take, and depending on the at least at Flow, we want to make sure that our customer have the best experience and seamless experience. So we're okay to take some of those risks. This is a cost, but also it brings a good experience to the EV driver.
Okay. And I think we have 15 minutes left. So I would like to open it up for either the audience or online. So whoever. Do we have microphones in the room, or we have Noel, Mark?
Yeah.
The lady over there.
Thanks. One comment and one question. So on the charging stations, when we talk about timeouts, for those who deploy charging stations, it's important that they realize they have to put it with a good internet connection. So either it's Ethernet or it's a very strong cellular connection, 5G or a good 4G, because also with 5018 plug and charge, if you want to install certificates, this takes time. These are kilobytes that are transferred. So this can be one issue or one point of conflict or problem. What I would like to ask is, how is your view, maybe from the payer perspective, on working with the Open Charge Alliance to get the payment or the credit card processing into the OCPP protocol? Because, as I think Matthieu mentioned it very briefly, you have I think an anonymous token from the payment terminal, which you need to reconcile with your transaction ID from OCPP somehow in the backend, and this is not identified. There's a payment terminal or payment task force in OCPP, and I would love to have you guys on there as well, if you're not already.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I can speak from my perspective. We are now integrated with OCPP. So there's going to be two ways to do it. One is kind of, let's say, post-payment or post-transaction, different data dissemination methods, right? So you can, we can drop down into an Amazon SQS, you can pull down and then actually have a transaction ID that you can reconcile. Additionally, you're looking at server-to-server payment integration. It'll be server to OCP direct integration too. So will be one of the other benefits. So there's kind of two ways, but that is something that as we're evolving, we're seeing more and more of.
As a backend provider, I can just say it's more scalable to have an OCPP solution and integrate with different payment providers. That's just from our point of view.
Thank you. No?
Hi. I wanted to maybe respond to a few things that have been said related to the U.S. requiring contact chip-based readers. I'm not sure if that's what you were suggesting, Matt, but in the aim of encouraging rolling up sleeves and getting things done, I will point to Section 680, 106 of the Federal Register, Title 23, payment methods under the NEVI. Unless charging is permanently provided free of charge to customers, charging stations must provide for secure payment methods accessible to persons with disabilities, which at a minimum shall include a contactless payment method that accepts major debit and credit cards, and either a automated toll-free phone number or a SMS system that provides the EV charging customer with the option to initiate charging and submit payment. And it goes on.
So no, we can stop there. So you make the decision,
Yeah,
only contactless payment now?
There's no U.S. federal requirement for contact chip-based credit card or debit card payments under the NEVI. And to the point raised from the credit card device and Visa's perspective, I'm having trouble squaring the desire for too many options and giving customers lots of options to choose from, because I read a Visa white paper, a Pulse white paper saying that contactless is not taking off in the US because there are too many and potential interface points for a customer to engage with at the payment terminal, which creates a self-perpetuating problem where they don't know if they want to swipe or insert or tap, and so it is going. The customers are going to fall back into their usual behavior of what's working. And the Visa paper that I did read actually suggested for transportation applications like transit or parking, because these are unattended outdoor devices, to the point of maintaining a high reliable system, we want to reduce the points of failure. And so the discussion in the preamble and the regulatory impact assessment for the NEVI actually took this into account from a protection of the physical devices by enclosing that chip insert option. And lastly, to the point around unattended security risks, this has been a key concern of the US Secret Service. This is raised in FBI research and also recent CBS News video published, I want to say last week, in which they were reporting that quote, card skimmers are evolving and hitting gas stations such that low-income drivers are hit hardest. And so if we're interested in protecting customers, especially those new to electric vehicles, working with systems that are unattended, outside, and hard to function today, the US Secret Service, during the CBS News interview, actually suggested the use of tap-to-pay technologies. So I'd encourage this good conversation to coalesce into what the design will be for the next generation of stations so that we have secure, reliable, and affordable charging. Thank you.
Okay, you also have a question, or it's okay? Good. Then thanks, Noel. I think.
And maybe just, it's important just to clarify, right? So when you do have a legacy swipe on there, if a card has an EMV chip on it, it doesn't take the swipe, right? It says, please tap card or please insert card, right? So you can give those instructions. So just because something does have a legacy swipe on it, you actually can't then, you disable it so it picks up, it defaults to the EMV method of payment, right? Which can be, tap or insert of an EMV credit card. So, having legacy swipe doesn't actually mean then, so you still are taking off the, the skimmer compliance risk, right? That's associated with the static information in the mag swipe of a card, right? But we're still seeing about 10% of cards, did you say that, about 10% of cards? Because it depends a little bit, right? That have legacy swipe on them.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't
I don't have the exact number handy, but there's a reason why there's a move towards chip, right? Dynamic data versus static data, there's no question.
Okay.
And
Okay. Let's move on here. Noel informed us that we are all good if we do only tap, even if maybe the credit card customers might not have a tap card, but hopefully they're going to get them then soon in the mail. Lady over there.
Oh.
Hi everyone, I'm Yiming Ma. I'm the product manager of Supercharger at Tesla. So I just want to point out a few concerns and my wish to the payment industry. It's kind of like in line with what Noel just mentioned. I would like to kind of like to see the policy makers, like the lawmakers and let's say Visa, to kind of facilitate the contactless payment. So it's just based on the fact of, like, let's say two facts. The first is, let's say the chip insert and the chip swipe, let's say especially chip swipe has less security, but also they have higher point of reliability failure in unattended situations where there's rain, there's water ingress, there's everything there, right? So that's a lot of like concern we care about, and a lot of cost going into the EVSE industry. And the second is the ABA, American Bankers Association, reported that around 90% of customers have credit cards with contactless payment in North America by 2022. I don't know how that progress is being made so far, if that 90% number is still valid, but these all points out that we should kind of support a more advanced technology and less cost technology across the industry. So that's just my wish. Thanks.
I think it sounds like we're kind of saying the same thing, right? I mean, we're not saying, you can't, again, if you have a chip card, you actually, even if there is a legacy swiper, that's not, it's not a very expensive component. It actually won't take the swipe, right? You can't swipe it. The reader actually, you program it to default to the chip card option. You could probably speak higher on how the adoption of consumers with actual contactless. But chip card and contactless are not synonymous, right? So the EMV chip in the card, right, that creates the dynamic token for each transaction versus the static data in the mag swipe, right? That does not necessarily mean it's synonymous with actually having the NFC capability in the card, right? So having the secure chip card and being contactless capable are not synonymous. I think the gap is closing. So again, that's the beauty, right, of having evolving technology. At NICE, by the way, we have a contactless only reader. We deploy it in like pretty much every other country only. We only have, our reader that actually does still have the legacy swipe and also the EMV chip as a fallback, because we're still not seeing that adoption rate of contactless payments. But that's one of those things that, as it is, if someone wants to buy a contactless only device in the US and put it on, by all means, but we're just not seeing that same number of contactless transactions. So look, it's the consumer's choice.
Yeah, I'll add two cents on this. And so I think obviously the networks we can control, but there's different layers. So California is a state that's been very involved in terms of making decisions with payments, right? So, that's something that's decided at the state level. And so in those cases there, your hands are kind of tied. But when it comes to from a network perspective, like I'll just repeat what I said before, is that you can do contactless only, and you just have to have the backup. That's what we have. And so if there's feedback around how that's causing issues, like obviously we're there to have conversations around it, and I open that. But yeah, you shouldn't feel you have to do certain things. It's all, again, about maintaining the best customer experience. If a lot of people come into your stations don't have contactless, which we're trying to narrow that gap, obviously, on the network side, then you may want to consider having a dip reader or mag stripe. I mean, those are decisions, those are tough decisions to make, but those are decisions until we get to a place where contactless is more prevalent. That's where we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe a quick question. What about the old model of attended payments when we know exactly upfront how much it's going to cost us to pay, and we don't need to go to the machine to tap? We need to go maybe a service station or like somebody who takes payment from us, and then that somebody authorized. Is that has any future at all, or we're just always looking at unattended payments?
So, Matt, are you going to hire people who are sitting on your charging sites?
I
mean, it works right now, but
we used to say that our stations are so big, we put someone in there to make sure they're reliable. But yeah, I think with the different tariffs that we're seeing, I'm not sure that's the best for the industry, but we're seeing more and more complex tariff going on. So it's very hard to sometimes calculate the cost of your charging stations like beforehand, because you have time, you have also like dynamic pricing of the kilowatt hour, you may have emergency demand response and so on going on. So yeah, you can set a limit. This you can already do with a mobile app, for example, from your EMSP, set a limit there. So this is technically doable, but yeah, is it something you want to do?
So yes, and I think it's probably highly dependent on what kind of charging site you have. If you're in a parking garage with 2 chargers, or if you're actually building a charging hub where you have also food there, and there you might have an attendant. I have not seen an integration where you're using that, but I think that's probably depending on the hub, and Lonneke has an answer.
Yes, sure. Thank you. I just wanted to interject. So, of course, there are all these charging networks out there that are just for charging. But the good news is that there are also petrol stations, or gas stations, as you call them, from Shell, from Total Energies, from BP, who are step by step introducing chargers next to their petrol pumps, their gas pumps. And of course, they have a model of operating a gas station where you go inside, you pay even after you filled up or even before you filled up. So they use charging in the exact same way. Yeah. And we've worked with them, with like oil companies who run petrol stations inside OCA. We published a white paper exactly how you can do that. I know that Exxon here in the United States is not yet including charging stations in their petrol stations. I hope they will start doing so, and then the transition from combustion engines to electric vehicles will be even more seamless than it is now.
Okay, thanks for adding that on. We're at the end of our panel. Erica is letting me know that we need to move off the stage. So thanks everyone for your interest, and thanks to the panel.